Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to this ongoing series, Interview with an Exorcist. My name is John Barnwell, and I'm here in the greater Detroit area with Dr. Douglas Gabriel, who happens to be a walking syllabus of Waldorf education, being that he's the most accredited and qualified and experienced Waldorf teacher in North America. It behooves us to try and pick his brain to get some insights as to how we could bring these impulses into fruition. And it really centers around redeveloping the concept of the threefold being of man that has been lost in modern education. And so, with that being said, hello, Douglas. Oh, by the way, I'm not going to read his curriculum vitae. It is available on the previous couple of podcasts, in case you're wondering.
Well, that reminds me when a cardinal came to my graduation and he started reading the accolades, and this and this and this and this. And finally he got down about halfway and he goes, "Oh, that's enough." and, he didn't finish. It was same thing with my yearbook in high school. Definitely an overachiever. But we got to remember I started off as like a special education student. So there's hope for everyone. Never give up on anyone. But today we're going to talk about well, first, let me just say, as I've said before, basically, I was born in a very strange condition. I didn't develop these things. They might have been developed in a past incarnation. I don't know. And do I know why that I was born this way? I can only assume that it came from my father, who was Father William Bresnahoff. And besides that, I can't really tell you, but I've said it 1,000 times probably already. It's a curse. It wasn't a blessing. And it caused, in most cases, wherever I went, people would immediately take me in, put me in charge. They didn't even know me, put me in charge, and then later make sure that they made sure I wasn't in charge and get rid of me one way or the other. And for whatever reason, it didn't matter. So you say to yourself, well, obviously this is some kind of bad karma you have, Douglas. Well, possibly. And working with exorcisms, I can tell you, though, that in an exorcism, yeah, I guess I'd have to say in every single case that I've seen someone healed through the Holy Trinity and the hosts of angels and the hierarchy and the saints coming in to help that person, angels would appear. And bigger angels, archangels would appear. All kinds of spiritual beings would come into the room. So in a way, it was kind of a blessing for me because it was a bit of a reinforcement of the spiritual connection. But in terms of, did I want to do that? No, I never wanted to do that. I never intended to do that. So as I said last time, when I became a Waldorf teacher after working in the school as a helper for some years, I took on the school and I took the whole school on, and it went into me. It was already there a bit, but now this time it was very official because I was a class teacher. That's what they call a teacher who goes from first through eighth grade. And I had this beautiful group of children. And as I pointed out, I started off with like 24 children and ended up to be 34, 36 children. No one ever had that many children. They'd have to rearrange the classroom assignments because my class was so big. And who did I take in after the 24? Some of the worst children you could ever imagine. And I'm not exaggerating. And I had already worked with severely challenged children when I was in training and things. And no, these were children who had, basically Tourette's, but they didn't swear. They just had to burst out and say horrible things that would upset people anytime they wanted. Or they couldn't sit still, or they were troublemakers, right? But in the end, they all turned out beautiful. Why? Because Waldorf education is inherently curative education, highly pedagogic. It's healing education. And so I was there to get myself healed, but I also, I was trying to figure out a vocation. I was trying to figure out my tribe. And so the last place I thought I'd end up was in Detroit, at that time called the darkest city in America, the murder capital of America at that time. Very, very difficult living downtown in Detroit at that time. But I decided to stay because of these beautiful children, and that maybe, working in the Christian community, working in the school would be my mission in life and my vocation. So I basically said to myself, okay, I'm going to do this for 8 years. And then I'm going to go to Hawaii because I'd been to Hawaii a few times and I just thought, yeah, what the heck, go to Hawaii. There's Hawaii Waldorf schools. And so I would say this off the cuff, right? I'd say this all the time. And matter of fact, everybody knew that was my greatest desire. Help the school for 8 years and go to Hawaii. Now, in a Waldorf school, if you go from first through eighth grade, they give you a sabbatical. They give you a year off. They pay you to do nothing as a reward for the 8 years. Most teachers at that point, if they're really in the anthroposophy, they travel from school to school. They try to increase their understanding and help people out and help other schools out. And then they come back and everything's good. Well, when I started working at the Detroit Waldorf School, the first thing they did I think it might have been the first day of school, they came to me and said, Douglas, we have an emergency. We don't have the money to pay payroll in 2 weeks. Well, what are you talking about? You're chock full of students here. How do you not have the money to pay? How could this have happened? Who's in charge of the money? And they said, well, no, and excuses. Nobody could give me a straight answer. They said, we want to put you in charge. And I went, okay, so I have 2 weeks to raise, I forget what it was, $25,000 or something for payroll, or all the teachers didn't get paid. And it would even be that they'd always be behind because where are we going to get the money for that? So they instantaneously put me in the first day of school in charge of the finances. So I created a walkathon and we raised the money we needed, more than we needed to meet payroll in 2 weeks. And then they said, oh, well, you're kind of good at this. Why don't you become the head of the finance committee? And I said, oh, okay. All right, well, let's see this and let's see that. Let's see this and that. We had a bookkeeper and she's like, well, we don't have that. What do you mean you don't have the list of people who've donated to you? What do you mean you don't have an accurate list of the people who are in debt to the school because you don't collect your payments from them? What do you mean that you have a roof that needs to be replaced and this is a historic building and the roof is going to cost $250,000 to replace because it has to be slate, same color. You literally have to order this stuff from outside of the country and bring it in, and you handing me this job? What happens? This is what happens. There was a myth for a long time that Waldorf schools are supposed to be administered by all the teachers in a college of teachers, so that only people who taught the children get to make decisions concerning the children. That was Rudolf Steiner's idea. Okay, what they forget is that there was a second and a third stage to that. When that didn't work, because no one can run anything by a committee. Trust me, I have been in too many situations where good luck. It always devolves to the lowest common denominator. Sorry, that's the bottom line. So do I believe in that? No. But I also knew the history because I knew Johannes Tautz, who was the historian of the Waldorf School. And basically, the College of Teachers was a miserable failure. So they elected 3 teachers, elected them from that college. They elected 3 people they trusted, and they became a triumvirate, a group of 3, and they ran the school. Now, that's the way most Waldorf schools were running in America when I came into the scene. But later, I found out that Rudolf Steiner literally said, no, one person has to run the school. So I've always been for having a headmaster of the school, a headmaster teacher. The best teacher should run the school. It's a head master teacher, right? So in Hawaii, I was a headmaster teacher, and this upset the whole Waldorf world that there was a principal in a Waldorf school. But the reality was this. The specialty teachers, French, German, painting, art, phys ed, Boatmer gymnastics, eurythmy, these specialty teachers, they didn't have a full load to carry, and they didn't have to carry the burden of learning a new curriculum every year. So they were put in administrative positions. Holy Lord. This happened throughout all the Waldorf schools in America, and it was a mess because these were people who were not trained as Waldorf teachers. They don't know how to spell Rudolf Steiner. They are not anthroposophists. And in almost every case where they became the people in charge, they were not Christian. Rudolf Steiner said there's two things that can determine whether the Waldorf school is doing their job. First, that Christ walks through the halls of the school. Second, that they study Rudolf Steiner without divorcing his name from his works in the College of Teachers. So all teachers need to be studying together anthroposophy. Now, you don't teach anthroposophy to the children. That's the last thing you do. But it should come through you because anthroposophy provides life forces that's where I came up with the name. It was supposed to be not may the force be with you. That's stupid. May the life force be with you. Rudolf Steiner said, every idea that does not become your ideal becomes a force that slays you. But every idea that becomes your ideal creates life force in you. Unfortunately, you could just simply look at these teachers and they didn't believe in Steiner's ideas. So they were hypocrites to begin with. And as a clairvoyant, I could see that. But secondly, in being a hypocrite, they were slaying their own life force. And this is why the Waldorf schools have rotted from the inside out 100 years after Steiner created them.
I thought I heard Madam Tyler chiming in the background.
Yes, you do.
I did.
Sometimes I thought it was an angel, but sometimes it's her.
Anyways, yes, these things are challenging, of course. And when you get into the history of Waldorf education, you go back to the first school in Stuttgart. That's the ultimate. If you don't know about the first school in Stuttgart, you're not really a Waldorf teacher, okay? Just so you know. And those of you that are watching this and consider yourself a Waldorf teacher, it would behoove you to try and learn at least something about that initial impulse. But in the original Waldorf school in Stuttgart, there were 12 teachers, and which is an interesting number from many different vantage points. But within this group of 12, Rudolf Steiner had brought in interesting and dedicated individuals, but they didn't always teach within their specialty. For example, when he got Walter Johannes Stein, the great Grail researcher, but see, Walter Johannes Stein he had a PhD in physics. And so, of course, Rudolf Steiner says, okay, you'll teach history, which is not his qualification. Of course, he ended up becoming the leading Grail historian of the 20th century. But in the school itself, in that initial school, eventually the mantle that Douglas is talking about, in 1933, Paul Bowman became the leader of the school when the state demanded that the school create this position. And so everybody trusted him to do that. And so as a result of conforming to the way of doing things at that time, he became the leader, and he was the music teacher, which is interesting. And I think that Waldorf education really is a musical problem. And I totally and wholeheartedly agree with Novalis and Pythagoras, for that matter. Illness is a musical problem. And so what can we do to try and establish coherence in the breathing and in the will, and as a result, in the thinking of the developing individual or child? And that's basically what we're trying to get at here, is that if you have not established that in your own world, how are you going to be able to help develop that in other people? So this gets to the crux of the matter, really.
Absolutely, completely. And let's say, in the first couple weeks that I was in Detroit, years before I went to the Detroit Waldorf School and started teaching there, but just before I started volunteering there, all the parents had gathered around the school with bricks, and they were throwing bricks through the window. because they were so mad at the teachers who were running the school because they just fired 2 teachers and another teacher quit. And they didn't have much justification for it. And these people that they fired had been around for a while, and they were a little rough around the edges, but they were trying. And who was it that fired them? Oh, the teachers who hated Werner Glass and Hans Gabert and Barbara Glass and Rosemary and Theo Bergen and Mariana Bergen. These are the teachers there who were not anthroposophists, who were not Christians, who got into the inner group and used their power and control to fire people. And so literally in the first couple weeks that I was there, I'm going down to, some people came to the house and said, this is happening. They're going to burn down the school. And we're like, what? They can't burn down the school. I'm planning to go to school here. So I run down the street. It's about 6 blocks. And here's a mob. And they'd already broken some windows and they got bricks in their hands and they want blood because the way that the teachers had been fired. And after they made the commitment to the parents that these teachers would be with their children for years to protect them, to become a family member, to teach this beautiful curriculum, which is supposed to bring life forces, ideas. Waldorf is ideas, archetypal ideas brought into the ideal, into application. And it was just a mess. And so I actually got involved with it. And it came down to some problems that we could solve a little bit of. And we tried to solve those problems. But in the end, those teachers were alienated for the rest of their life from that school after dedicating their blood, sweat, and tears to it. So when I got into the school, I knew this atmosphere was there. And as I've told you before, the school was haunted. And I don't mean a little bit haunted. I mean major haunted. In other words, people were killed in the school, probably in a horrible way. And when you were walking in the stairway, in the floor downstairs in the basement, you could see footprints being made into this foam kind of linoleum. And you could literally stand there and watch the footprints come right at you and pass through you and go right through you. And no matter what I did, I could not get rid of that spirit. I tried, I understood, I got images of some things, horrible things that happened. I didn't want to believe they happened. But then they not only put me in charge of finance, they put me in charge of every single committee. In the end, there were 12 committees. I was sometimes the only person in the committee, but I ended up running the school. And so we were redoing, because a big deal was the boiler. So we were redoing the boiler. And as we're redoing the boiler, what do we find? Human bones in the bottom of the boiler, multiple children. Okay. We had to call the police, the whole thing. We'd never let this out. I don't know that many people, more than 2 or 3 of us, even know this happened, but the school, it was an old boiler. You could throw someone into the boiler, and they had. So this place was haunted horribly. And because these people weren't Christian, instead of Christ walking in the hall of that school, it was ghosts, unresolved ghosts.
Just to make this clear, these are bones of people before it was ever a Waldorf school.
Correct. Well, as far as I know, yes, they were old. They were able to, assess that a little bit and assess the age of it and so on and so forth. Because what happened was the bones fell through the grate and they were actually underneath, and they didn't get completely annihilated. But anyway, that's the kind of thing I was working with. So I'm in this school. I'm trying to balance the fact that if I ever let some of these people know that I'm clairvoyant, and on the side, under my name Gabriel, I had 2 different companies, some that were helping children, doing analysis for educational analysis for children and psychological. And then another one where I was doing some other stuff. Anyway, I had different things going on. If they had ever found that out, they would have fired me immediately. Why? Because as I told you, anytime a clairvoyant shows up in an anthroposophic community, Waldorf or otherwise, Dornock or Emerson, it doesn't matter. The place explodes. Because what happens? People get revealed for who they are. Not because the clairvoyant said anything, but a possessed person, when they come around somebody who has angelic energy around them, they go crazy.
Yeah, all you have to do is give the example of Rudolf Grosser. who did the best he could to try and keep it very low, on the low key, about his own clairvoyance. But a couple of clairvoyants, when they run into each other, have a pretty quick assessment of the other individual, and so it's kind of funny. But let's dig a little bit into the interesting relationship that you and Tyler have with Hermann Hesse, because with your glass bead game, you brought a very interesting dynamic that fits right into this conversation, because here she is,
Well, you
the
summoned
glass
me.
bead lady.
Yes, that was me hollering from the basement, telling Douglas to give you some time to speak.
Speak of the angel. You see, as
No,
soon as you
it's the
speak of the
thing is,
angels show up.
But
I- go ahead, excuse me.
but to get into this, it's interesting because there's a very fundamental way in which Hermann Hesse fits into the narrative of this first Waldorf school, and I think maybe I should let Douglas or you give a little bit of that, and then we can take a look at it more deeply.
Well, and I just want to say this, the first question was how it arose with the two of us. So Douglas may have had an experience of Hermann Hesse and the glass bead game in his other iterations of life. But for me, I was trained in graduate school. I hate the word trained, but I learned how to teach adults. I loved teaching adults. And the way adults learn, you can't sit them in a classroom, in a desk, and say, okay, read chapter 1 and answer the 10 questions. It's just not going to work. Adults, much like children, want to learn through their own discovery. And so what I try to do is to lay out as much material as I can, hoping that there's something in that material which has been vetted for truth, or, it resonates at a high frequency, and that you approach it. And from that, you learn something. And it doesn't matter to me what you learn, because what you learn is more about you individually than it is about the material. So when we had started developing this in the internet, because we have several spaces, Neo-Anthroposophy and Gospel Sophia, we had written the books, we were doing videos of the political world in the swamp. And I said, what is this that I'm seeing? It's this landscape, Douglas. What would you call this? And he said, well, you're showing people how to play the glass bead game. And then it was just like, oh my gosh, of course, this is what it is. And so then Douglas explained to me why it was that.
Waldorf education for adults. And the beauty of what Tyler has done is the glass bead game is basically a synthesis. It's a condensation. It's the dew that appears. It's something that manifests in the moment, that is the leading icon for the future. And so you can cross over this bridge, because we have a bridge, and the bridge goes to our spirit, it goes to the Anthroposophy, it goes to eternal curriculum, it goes to Patriots for Truth, it goes for...
No, it doesn't. The bridge, the reason we had to have the bridge is because a lot of people that had followed us in the geopolitical realm didn't want to go to the spiritual realm, and vice versa. So we had to create these two different places in the internet, and then would say, now there's a bridge if you want to cross the bridge, but again, it has to be up to you. Sorry to interrupt, but that's the way I see it.
No, that's right. And it's, on one side, the bridge is spiritual science, and the other side is spiritual science and application. So if spiritual science is true and you can study it and you become clairvoyant, then you should be able to predict geopolitical events. Well, so far, everything that we have ever predicted in the last 7 or 8 years has never come wrong, but demonstrated as being incorrect. Why? Because we're basing it upon what arises out of these life forces that come to you through studying this. And when you play the glass bead game, you play your part, but you're then supposed to be awakened to everyone else's part. The most important part of the glass bead game is not what you present, not your glass bead. It's the way that they all work together. And so that's what I thought was going on when I joined Waldorf and wanted to be a Waldorf teacher. And then after the first year, they made me a delegate and I went to the summer conferences and got involved in helping arrange them and getting very interesting people to come. And so I got deeply involved in the Association of Waldorf Schools of North America that puts on this summer conference. And I could see from the beginning that they were completely disorganized. They were really just not practical people. Steiner points that out, that there's two types of people now, the Aristotelians and the Platonists. Well, obviously, I'm an Aristotelian. And the people who want to just do the art and just have the nice feeling of Waldorf, but they don't want to ever read a Steiner book. They don't even want to hear Steiner's name. Well, they're not cosmologists. They're not Aristotelians. They're not doing it for cognitive clairvoyance. They're doing it because they think that it feels good. But then when they get in a corner and somebody says, well, you teach the etheric body, right? Yes. What's the etheric body? And then they're going to say, it's the body of time and rhythm. That's all they'll be able to tell you. They won't have a single clue other than that. And I'm not exaggerating. Even at the top levels, in the old days, the anthroposophists were these geniuses, like John talked about. The first 12 teachers of the Waldorf school, amazing people, all in their own right. They were hand chosen by someone Steiner sent out to the Anthroposophical Society, really, who could speak German. And they brought the best back, and they all wanted to work with Steiner. And they were all very professional in their field. In Waldorf, here's what happens. You got two groups of people. And unfortunately, it goes back to that old adage. Those who can do. Those who can't teach. Those who can't teach teachers. Those who can't teach teachers administrate. School administrate. And I know this to be an absolute fact because I've been in the business for 40 years at all levels, parochial, public, Steiner, and everything else, homeschooling, all that. So I've seen this, and it is true. So who did they put in charge of OSNA when I raised the money to create the position for a director, a chairman of the OSNA? One of the worst people in the entire Waldorf movement, who was a handwork teacher, who wasn't even a good handwork teacher. She'd been fired from that, and then they had to make up a job for her in the school. And really, she was very old. She didn't know jack about Waldorf, and all she did is go around as a chairman getting people fired. And then I'd raised the money to create a business. There was a business group. In the first year, I said, look, you, and you, come on. You guys are the smart guys. Your schools are successful. Let's get a business plan together for all the schools. And then let's create a group here that, each one of us can go out and help a school with their budget and so, and get some sense to this, get some practicality to this. So it was created. And who did they put in charge? A guy who's not an anthroposophist, who's not a Christian, who's a pathetic. He wasn't even a teacher in the school. He was a secretary. And that's who they put in charge. And this very man worked against me to try to stop me from raising money for all the schools. But in the end, I raised money and created a master teacher journeyman apprentice program, a diversity program, repayment of your debt program, all these programs that are still in the Waldorf schools to this very day. But in the end, for reasons, I think it's, people would say it was jealousy. No, it wasn't necessarily jealous. I wasn't someone to be jealous of. I was kind of not a very, not a good role model or whatever you'd want to call it. The point is, I wasn't a person who instilled jealousy. But what they did see was competence. And what do people want? And this is the one thing that I'd say generally most spiritual teachers have no idea about. Why? Because it's the control issue. Most of the spiritual teachers, and like Steiner said, there's never been a good yogi who came to America. Because why? They're out of place here. They become alcoholics. They become materialists. They become sex mongers. They become greed mongers. I could just list so many. I can't list hardly any that America didn't change them when they came to America. So it's a control issue. So when these people got in control, they were able to kick me out and subsumed all this work that I had done and thought they were done with me, but they weren't. I just kept coming back like a roach. You just can't kill me.
Yeah, it gets into, by the way, as far as yogis, well, there was Paramahansa Yogananda.
He was wonderful.
He was one who was able to maintain his purity of impulse, but he he also had a great sense of humor. I mean, a woman came up to Paramahansa Yogananda and she said, she's a fundamentalist. She's going, "You're going to hell." He goes, "Madam, I may get there by and by, but obviously you're there already."
His body is incorrupt. I've
Yeah.
been there. The casket is glass. It's open. And it smells like the most beautiful flowers you've ever smelled. There's no flowers in the room. His body is fragrant to this point. It has not decayed one iota. He is a saint.
Yeah, he's a genuine one. And he considered himself to be the reincarnation of Alexander the Great. Just as an interesting aside.
It was in Steiner's time that he said that. Now, we can talk about Rajneesh if you'd like to. Some people will get very upset. And today, I don't want to mention anybody's name because some of these people are still in power. Some of these people are literally their brain would explode if they knew if I mentioned their name. But on the other hand, I do have to mention some people's name. I want to mention two people's name. At that time, I worked with, or after that, a little after that, I worked with Robin and Connie Dulaney. And they didn't help, they gave all the money for a program that I wrote to put all of Steiner's educational books into this series with this white stripe. It's called the Foundation of Waldorf Education Series. And the white stripe here shows that. And they donated the money for this and so many books you can't even shake a stick at. And another person I wrote in England, strangely enough, was actually for Rudolf Steiner Books, but that was Dr. Eva Frommer. And she has donated all of her money. And she was a fantastic, incredible child psychologist, amazing person, just one of the great saints that I've met. She said, I'm going to die. I go there, I have a terminal illness, and she helps me with it. She says, they told me a terminal illness. And then she, afterwards, after I was there for a while, she says, well, I have a terminal illness. I'm going to die. Douglas, what should I do with my money? And I said, oh, well, you should print books and put it into the collected work series. Because, for instance, this series right here, this was made for the Carnegie Foundation. Now in every library in America, every major college library in America has this set of 24 books, the Foundation of Waldorf Education Series, because they had said to Werner, if you can get these into an edition that is consistent, that's beautifully presented, that's well translated, we will take a copy of that and 2 videos. So we got 2 videos made on Waldorf, and we will give it to every single college and university in America to their library. And so when you go now and you see these in the library, you see Steiner's books now in the library all over. And then they did that to many libraries. So you started seeing, but the number one book that is stolen from the libraries are Steiner books. You go in there and you'll see this long list of all their Steiner books. You go and you look, there's not one of them there, not one. Because, people want this, and when they want it, they desperately want it, and usually those people are poor. And then there's the other people who aren't poor, who can work things, and the Waldorf people and the anthroposophists don't want them anywhere near them because they're competent, and they don't like competent people.
Well, there's also the other side of it, is that who's ever read a Steiner book one time and totally understood all of its contents? I mean, that's kind of an absurdity. I mean, I can think back. I would have particular key lectures that in the early days, it was quite difficult to get Steiner books. And I would have little booklets, they'd put out with like one lecture or two. And I'd read them over and 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 over. And I swear to you to this day that I read them and I wonder how I didn't notice something that was in this lecture that I've read so many times. And the answer to that is that the book didn't change. I changed.
And that's just what I'm saying with the glass bead game. We put out the material. We based everything upon anthroposophy. So we know that there is a foundation of truth. And you can read things over and over again. Just yesterday, I posted a video of Douglas on that did a few years ago on Ahriman and Lucifer. And people are pinging me saying, oh my gosh, this is really great. Thanks so much, Doug. Well, it was done 2 years ago, but because it's rooted in truth. It was as relevant today. The difference is you changed. This time you wanted to listen to that video. And can I also plug what we're going to be doing with our new books?
Yeah, might as well.
I hope so.
Oh, okay, good. So after I listened to the last video, I said, why doesn't John, we got to find a way for John to get his books back in print because he has such a huge demand for them. So we did find a group that is going to take maybe his last copy, and they're going to deconstruct it and redo it and put it digitally so it'll be available on Amazon. We're very excited. Now, did you start working on that project, John? Don't say no.
Of course.
Okay, good. Because if you don't have the time, send me the book and I'll get it done. But then I got thinking, well, wait a minute. What about Douglas's book, Spirit of Childhood? Now, I know we could take this to a publisher and start it again, but people, this is a lot of work. The 4 or 5 books that we did already, it's just a lot of work and I don't have time. But we're going to get Spirit of Childhood reprinted. So we're going to use the publisher that you're using as soon as we're finished. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take all of these lectures that Douglas has done over the years and group them together in small pamphlets and books, especially the ebooks. And what we want to do is help you guys out there that may be homeschooling Waldorf or want to learn more about it, or even put yourself as an adult through Waldorf. Douglas is going to offer these materials and essentially be a teacher trainer for Waldorf for anyone who cares to listen. Now, we're not selling it. It's not going to be packaged as that. But this series that we're doing right now is going to be a part of that Waldorf training. So big thing for all of us to do for the next year is to help you learn Waldorf in your home with your children.
Yeah, I think it's important to keep in mind, it's never too late for Waldorf. That when you can come to a clear understanding that you have wings, you just don't know it yet. And the reason you can't see your wings is because the part of you that is thinking about the world is light. It's light that you've received through Christ. And because you're peering out of that light, you cannot see that light. And that light has wings. And so we want to help you develop and unfold your wings of cognition, much as we've tried to do, although I must say I'm a bit of a Quasimodo in this company of angels here, but I try.
Well, you tried a lot. Steiner said that as soon as we could get the world to understand the heart is not a pump, Waldorf schools would no longer be limited in their growth. And so my big impulse was, I have to beat up Ralph Marinelli and John Barnwell until they prove the heart is not a pump, which they did. And that was your contribution to Waldorf education. Now,
wait a minute. And the thing is, that's going to be one of the first books that we print. We're going to take the material we've been doing online, and we want to do that heart book and a lot of other things, because we know that this online presence won't be the same in the next few years. So we want to get this material in your hands. We encourage you to get a print book. We keep them as cheap as possible on Amazon, but you need these copies. Just to John's point, so many times you want to go back to that book. You're underlining, you're writing notes. This is very important in your development. And I also want to ask out there, if we have artists who do veiled painting or anthroposophical type painting, we would love to know about you. We'd love to see your work, because we're going to have a lot of books that are going to need book covers, and you would be given, full credit for what you're doing. So please contact us. Okay, I'm out of here now. Y'all enjoy the.
Yeah, isn't that wonderful? She's a human dynamo. But
so the glass bead game is spiritual science.
But that being said, it's interesting because if you look at Emil Molt and his childhood relationship with Hermann Hesse, and Emil Molt was the individual that requested that there be a school at the factory that he owned for all of its workers and all of that. And that was the impulse that got Rudolf Steiner to start Waldorf education in the first place. And mind you, with the 36.5 feet of shelf space occupied by the works of Rudolf Steiner, you have to keep in mind that it's all a result of a question that somebody asked him, that he didn't arbitrarily just come out with, oh, I think you should be doing this, that, or the other thing. He was always very reticent, and he would wait until somebody asked him, because then the impulse would be pure. And in light of that mention of Emo Molt and his relation with Hermann Hesse, it's very interesting to see the way in which their relationship developed, and that Hesse couldn't take that step that Emo Molt had, because Hermann Hesse had a more of an Eastern orientation. He didn't trust thinking, whereas we know from Rudolf Steiner's work that the core of the being of man is that very realm of thinking, that we are basically thinking lights, and that if you want to get to a direct relationship to that, that's the path of intuition, as laid out in the Philosophy of Freedom. But that being said, the experience of that light is through the realm of imagination. But to create beauty out of that is that realm of developed inspiration. And that's an artistic realm. And that's the part that gets left out of a lot of your Aristotelians, is they forget to create beauty. And so we got to hand it to all those artists and sculptors and eurythmists and all of that are working so hard to make sure that the future will be beautiful.
On his deathbed, they asked Steiner if he had any regrets, and he said, well, and he said a few things, but one of the things he said is, I would take the Waldorf movement by the helm and turn it 180 degrees towards art. And just as you said, it's about art. Now, when we're talking about what happens with a great teacher like Rudolf Steiner, who comes and he's so far beyond everyone around him, then we know that it's going to be like so many of these spiritual teachers. It becomes, it doesn't mean to be, but it becomes a cult of the personality, because they can't rise up to his clairvoyant perception. There's nobody who could really be said has carried on the work of Rudolf Steiner as a peer. You know, they were much less brilliant than him. And to this very day, what has happened, it's the degradation, it's the rotting at the core of anthroposophy, internationally, nationally, and in its cultural islands called Waldorf schools, and in its different projects, you know, biodynamics and Camp Hill and so on and so forth. And the old folks who were my teachers, well, they've all passed. I was the young guy, and now I'm old. And so just the other day, another person I know who was a Waldorf teacher chimed in on a remark and said, yeah, I'm getting the same calls you're getting. People call and they say, sorry, I'm the last Waldorf teacher here, and they've kicked me out. They've chased me out. I'm gone. And so what is it? Why is it that in basically almost any spiritual teaching, for instance, let's take the Hippocrates Health Institute and the lady who founded it. What's her name?
Anne Wigmore, and then it was developed by Victoras Kovinskas.
Right. So Anne Wigmore was a genius who, out of necessity, realized what wheatgrass could do and what a total raw diet can do. And she was a genius. And when you were around her, you felt that you were in the presence of higher beings. And this would be true with most of these people that you would know who started these things. These are amazing people. But then when it comes down to their students, they tend to become hollow, hypocritical. They tend to parrot things, and they create what Rudolf Steiner said about anthroposophy. He said that in Europe, anthroposophists will be able to contact the spiritual world and develop anthroposophy and spiritual science. But in America, they would turn it into a wooden doll version of it. And then in what we're going to read today to you, the new Isis myth that Rudolf Steiner wrote, which is only a few paragraphs. And as John said earlier, no matter how many times I've read this, I'm sure I've read it over 100 times. I'm still seeing things in it where I just can't believe I didn't see it before. And, you know, I've taught Theosophy probably 30 times. So, you know, every time I read the book Theosophy by Steiner, I don't care. It blows my mind. And I just say, come on now, how did I not see this before? How did it not make sense or whatever? And that's the deal. It is an open mystery center. The mystery centers used to be secret, and only those who were chosen, the elect, could go in and find out the secrets of spiritual science. Now there's no more hiding anything. Every single tradition, secret tradition that I know of, in Tibetan Buddhism or in Trans-Caucasian teaching or whatever, it does not matter. It's all been revealed. But it doesn't mean that the person who gets exposed to it is going to understand it. So then what is it that happens? Well, Rudolf Steiner had said that 100 years after his death, the worst thing that could happen is to separate his name from his works. Okay, well, that's happened. And he also said that some of the people who would be leading the society at the turn of the century would be people who had failed their Egyptian initiation, which we are replicating at a higher level, the Egyptian epoch here in our epoch, the Anglo-Germanic epoch. We are replicating what the Egyptians went through, but at a higher level. And so these people would approach the temple, he said. He gave a great description about this. They'd approach a temple, the Egyptian temple, and on the outside there'd be these great, these almost like pillars, those two things that are on the outside, and they'd be so overwhelmed by it. Then they'd enter and they'd start to see some of the art, some of the hieroglyphs, and it would overwhelm them. And that was enough. That's as far as they could go. So they could see the outside, they could walk in the inside and get a feeling, but they never got to go the next two steps. And that's who is running the Anthroposophic Society now, internationally, nationally. I know these people, and I used to know all of them. They were all my friends in the old days. Nowadays, some of the people that they've put in these positions are a joke. They are anti-Steiner, and yet they're on the Central Committee for the Anthroposophical Society. Or there are people in America who literally have never really done anything. They've never done anything for Waldorf. They've never done anything for anthroposophy, and yet now they're the leaders of it. And then they're surprised when they run out of money. Now, did Rudolf Steiner have any trouble with money? No. People flocked to him. They gave him the money to build the first Curtianum, the money to build the second Curtianum. Why? Because they had faith and trust in him. But this is like so many spiritual paths, like Trungpa Rinpoche. Who followed in his footsteps? Nobody. Who followed in Rajneesh's footsteps? Nobody. Who followed in Piravalai Khan's footsteps? Nobody. Who followed in Krishnamurti's footsteps? Nobody. Not a single person was chosen to be their protege to carry on the work. And most of these groups, why? Because when you come to America, as Steiner says, it's where decadent things go to die. And those are his words. Now, people get all worked up when you're talking about skin color, race, and these kind of things, but they don't understand a word that Steiner's saying about that. They don't even understand his terminology. But when it comes to America, we have a bigger challenge than the rest of the world. We have an extra electromagnetic body, an extra double. And so when Waldorf came to America, we had some of the greatest European teachers here leading these schools. There wasn't a single Waldorf school that didn't have a gray-haired, brilliant Waldorf teacher who'd gone through the system multiple times, like Jesse Darrell went through 5 times, and Brian Masters went through, so these people go through again and again and again, and every time they become more humble, more spiritual, more directly connected to spiritual science. And then they died, they left. And now what do we have? We have diversity, equity, and inclusion being the idea. Well, guess what? It's impossible to make it the ideal. It's like the Green New Deal. 100% impossible to make it work. Anthroposophy, wonderful. Now make it work. And what happens? People falter. They can't do it. And then they get into power control situations that are so childish that literally I have seen this happen in every Waldorf school in America. When they reach age 21, they fire whoever the spiritual leader of the school is. This happened. I can name all the schools and the people I'm talking about. But the point is, we should expect this. Steiner said that 100 years after he gave anthroposophy, through the being of Anthroposophia, Sophia, the Kyriotades of wisdom, that it would be turned into an anti-anthroposophy. But at the same time, The true anthroposophist would begin to contact spiritual beings that he called superhuman beings from Venus, Mercury, and Vulcan. So in our time, we have the greatest spiritual advancements happening at the same exact time that things that were created as spiritual impulses have died in their core. They're rotten and they're still on the vine, but because they're part of a bureaucratic system, they can't go away. For instance, all isms. Name an ism that has morality to it. Oh, Catholicism? No. Protestantism? No. How about capitalism? We are the experiment in capitalism. We have failed. How about socialism or communism or fascism? Or how about the Workers' Party? How about any of these isms? They all fail because why? They are an idea that has not become an ideal. The people are not living what they know to be the truth. And thus, the entire facade is seen to be completely hypocritical, hollow, and baseless. And in fact, that is the truth. And so we should not be surprised. I'm not surprised that Waldorf, after all the work I've done for Waldorf, raising untold millions of dollars, printing hundreds and hundreds of Waldorf books, am I disappointed? No, I knew this was going to happen. I didn't know it was going to happen in my face, but it did, and I shouldn't be surprised. But I believe that Rudolf Steiner gave the new myth of Isis, the new Isis myth. He gave it in this book, in the version that I hope John's going to read to us. It takes 6 minutes to read us this thing. This is called Ancient Myths, Their Meanings and Connection with Evolution. And then in this book, the new Isis, called The Search for the New Isis. I doubt you can read that, Search for the New Isis and the Divine Sophia. And in another lecture called Isis and Madonna. And in a few other places, he gives this new Isis myth. And in my opinion, and based upon John's advice, I'm not going to analyze this for you because it's like a fairy tale. You analyze it, you kill it, So I want you to listen to these words that Rudolf Steiner gave. And it's about the sculpture called the Representative of Mankind. Christ is standing with his arm above and below, holding at bay Ahriman and Lucifer, and the Spirit of Humor is over in the corner. It's a 27-foot tall wooden sculpture. I've spent many, many hours in front of this, and I did experience exactly what Steiner says in this new myth that he has created, a new icon for our new future age. And I believe that what he's describing there is exactly what has happened to the Anthroposophical Society, Waldorf, and spiritual science inspired initiatives. And it's a sad story, but it's also a victory story. So we have provided it in the show notes below, the quote that John is going to share with you. And I hope that you take this very seriously and you read it. It's one of the most important things in anthroposophy, in my opinion, and it can give you strength to help see you through the tribulation, to see you through the wars, to see you through the battles that happen because of jealousy and control and dominance and hypocrisy and the hollowness of those who follow in the footsteps of the great teachers, but they are not in any way at the same level, and they never will be in this incarnation. And so they're just simply out of their fear trying to cover their tracks. But I don't know a single person in anthroposophy that has ever addressed this myth. And yet I've asked all the anthroposophists who ever knew Steiner about this myth, and every one of them had a different opinion.
And in light of what he had said, please have heart. As Fyodor Dostoevsky said, beauty will save the world. And so it behooves us to be able to approach that appearance of beauty, and that gives cause or can give you pause even to be able to bring yourself to consciousness about what you are doing, because as Rudolf Steiner says, there are no insignificant moments. And so I'm going to share with you from the Ancient Myths, and that's Collected Works 180, on the new Isis myth. And Douglas wanted me to share this with you, and I'm more than happy. We were quite excited when this first came out, I remember, because it's really the only place where Rudolf Steiner that I know of specifically addresses this challenge. And I quote, "A statue was intended to be the central point of the building," the first Goetheanum. "This statue presented a group of beings, the representative of man, then Luciferic and Ahrimanic figures. People looked at the statue and did not know, in the age of scientific profundity in the land Philisterium, that the statue, in fact, was only the veil for an invisible statue. But the invisible statue was not noticed by people, for it was the new Isis, the Isis of a new age. Some few persons of the land of scientific profundity had once heard of this remarkable connection between what was visible and what, as Isis' image, was concealed behind what was open and evident. And then, in their profound allegorical, symbolical manner of speech, they had put forward the assertion that this combination of the representation or the representative of man with Lucifer and Ahriman signified Isis. With this word signified, however, they not only ruined the artistic intention from which the whole thing was supposed to proceed, for an artistic creation does not merely signify something, but is something. But they completely misunderstood all that underlay it, for it was not in the least the point that the figures signified something, but that they already were what they appeared to be. And behind the figures was not an abstract new Isis, but an actual, real new Isis. The figures signified nothing at all, but were in fact in themselves that which they made themselves out to be. But they possessed the peculiarity that behind them there was the real being, the new Isis. Some few who in special circumstances and special moments had nevertheless seen this new Isis found that she is asleep. And so one can say the real deeper lying statue that conceals itself behind the external statue is the sleeping new Isis, a sleeping figure, visible but seen by few. Many persons then turned in special moments to the inscription, which is plainly there at the spot where the statue stands in preparation, but which has also been read by few. And yet the inscription stands clearly there, just as clearly as the inscription once stood on the veiled form at Sais. In fact, the inscription stands there. I am man. I am the past, the present, and the future. Every mortal should lift my veil. Another figure as a visitor once approaching the sleeping figure of the new Isis, then again and again, and the sleeping Isis considered this visitor her special benefactor and loved him. And one day she believed in a particular illusion, just as the visitor believed one day in a particular illusion. The new Isis had an offspring, and she considered the visitor whom she looked on as her benefactor to be her father. He regarded himself as the father, but he was not. The spirit visitor, who is none other than the new Typhon, believed that he could acquire a special increase of his power in the world if he took possession of this new Isis. So the new Isis had an offspring, but she did not know its nature. She knew nothing of the being of this new offspring. And she moved it about. She dragged it off far into other lands because she believed that she must do so. She trailed the new offspring about, and since she had trailed and dragged it through various regions of the world, it fell to pieces, into 14 pieces, through the very power of the world. Thus, the new Isis had carried her offspring into the world, and the world had dismembered it into 14 pieces. When the spirit visitor, the new Typhon, had come to know of this, He gathered together the 14 pieces, and with all the knowledge of natural scientific profundity, he again made a being, a single whole, out of the 14 pieces. But in this being, there were only mechanical laws, the laws of the machine. Thus, a being had arisen with the appearance of life, but with the laws of the machine. And since this being had arisen out of 14 pieces, it could reproduce itself again, 14-fold. And Typhon could give a reflection of his own being to each piece, so that each of the 14 offspring of the new Isis had a countenance that resembled the new Typhon. And Isis followed all that this strange affair, half divining, she could see the whole miraculous change that had come to her offspring. She knew that she had herself dragged it about, that she had herself brought all this to pass, but there came a day when in its true, its genuine form, she could accept it again from a group of spirits who were elemental spirits of nature, could receive it from nature elementals. And as she received her true offspring, which only through an illusion had been stamped into the offspring of Typhon, there dawned upon her a remarkable clairvoyant vision. She suddenly noticed that she still had the cow horns of ancient Egypt in spite of becoming a new Isis. And lo and behold, when she had thus become clairvoyant, the power of her clairvoyance summoned, some say Typhon himself, some say Mercury. And he was obliged, through the power of the clairvoyance of the new Isis, to set a crown on her head in the place where once the old Isis had the crown which Horus had seized from her. That is to say, the spot on where she developed the cow horns. But this crown was merely of paper, covered with all sorts of writings of a profoundly scientific nature. Still, it was of paper. And she now had two crowns on her head, the cow horns and the paper crown embellished with all the wisdom of scientific profundity. Through the strength of her clairvoyance, there one day arose in her the deep meaning, as far as the age could reach, of that which is described in St. John's Gospel as the Logos. There arose in her the Johannine significance of the mystery of Golgotha. Through this strength, the power of the cow horns grasped the paper crown and changed it into an actual golden crown of genuine substance. End quote. That's a real riddle.
Yeah, exactly. And as you point out, there's more questions than answers. Every time I read it, there's like, well, what's that mean? I think it's really important. I'd like to know. So, but I kind of feel a little bit like, with Waldorf, like, they have a wooden doll of Waldorf. And so it's like that 14 pieces that got put back together like a robot with machine language. And so we're seeing this happen now, I think. And so to me, one could discuss this ad infinitum. Unfortunately, most anthroposophists that I know don't even know this exists. And nowadays, someone said they were just in Dornoch, and they went there to see the statue because it's in the second Gertianum in a separate room. Couldn't get anybody to tell her how to get in. Tried for days. Finally, some little old lady shows up by accident and says, "Oh, you want to go into that room? Yeah. Oh, yeah. I got the key here." She goes and she opens it, and then just leaves her there. Nobody else is visiting. Nobody else even knows it exists. It's like the Gertianum is a what do you call it? It's a
mausoleum.
It's a mausoleum. That's what Sergei Prokofiev and Peter Sells said. It's a mausoleum to the unknown soldier, because you literally don't even know now when you go there it has anything to do with Rudolf Steiner. And so this was just so sad to hear that the one thing Steiner worked on, that statue, he put his lifeblood into that thing. It was at the foot of his bed, after the first Gertianum burnt, and he loved it tremendously. And so how could someone who wanted to know Steiner not go there and literally spend as much time as they could sitting in front of that? Because what did he say? It doesn't signify those things. It is those things. And my experience is, yes, I saw that being, invisible or not. I saw that being. I saw that inscription. And that's what has led me to my deeper research into Sophia. Because Isis is, can be kind of seen as a form of Sophia. John, thank you for reading that. You have such a great voice for reading those. In the old days, that's what we do. We'd go to John's house and we'd just sit around. John would pull down a book and start reading to us, and we'd all just go into reverie. So
Well,
I present that.
Just to give people some cribbed notes, you could even just go to Wikipedia, for those of you who want the simple path, and look up Isis, the myth of Isis, and you can find out who Typhon is, Typhon. That's a kind of a Greco-Roman Ptolemaic designation of the opponent, Set.
Who Steiner says is Typhon is Ahriman.
Yeah, is Ahriman. And why are we talking about Egypt? Well, if you look at Egyptian civilization, they're the same number of years before Christ as we are after Christ. So there's a path in anthroposophical cosmology where you look at reflex in the realm of time. Now you can do that from today and look back 7 days before this and 7 days after, or you could expand it all the way out in great, huge cycles of time. But the point is to develop a relationship to time, because Rudolf Steiner was very clear, and he said that Christ has given time back to mankind. And if you look at the world around you today, what do you see? You see a bunch of space beings. They really don't have any relationship to time. They don't know history. And so they can be fooled by the simplest memes or semi-concepts. Because why? Because they don't know that nobody's ever pulled it off before, and it didn't work before, and it won't work now. And so likewise with all these isms that Douglas is pointing out. But it's very important at this point that there are at least a few people out there that have some concept of history. And I hope that in future installments, we can expand this out and show the significance, the transition that took place during the reign of Charlemagne, Emperor Charlemagne, and the karmic reflex that comes out of the court of Aachen and of great Charlemagne and his paladins and the great school and all of that. But we've run out of time. And so as our wont, once again, we have to say goodbye. But I want to thank you for showing up. And Lady Tyla, of course, the Lady of the Well. And so with that being said, Dr. Douglas Gabriel, thank you very much. Tyla, Dr. Tyla, thank you. And I thank myself too. I got through that reading without even stumbling too much.
Excellent
So that's
job.
a good thing.
Thank you both.
Swift as the wild goose flies, dip, dip, and swing.